Hello, yeah, good day altogether. Since we had last time, we had the discussions about MDR and IVDR, so many talks about the medical devices and the in vitro devices, diagnostic devices, and now we change it a bit into what's a specific group. The specific group now is software as a medical device, and also software including artificial intelligence, AI, as a medical device in the overall setup of medical devices and IVDR. So whatever I explained here is also in relation with the webinar 10 days ago, because that webinar gives you the basic setup you need to know, and this one today adds on specific characteristics you need to consider, in particular with software as a medical device and artificial intelligence. So the idea why it is that way is because then I don't need to recreate and include everything again what we had in the presentation this time, or what we had last time. I do not need to rephrase that again in relations with software as a medical device, and I can go into more depths about what it is needed to bring a software into the market. Therefore, we had a bit in that distinction, and I think it's a very good way that we can go so far and describe it in the possibility to have it available for the full section of the medical device area, including software and AI, and also all others. So, but let's go right ahead, because we only have 3 hours time, and therefore we need to go through the basic point about the medical device software, AI-based medical device software, and all others is pretty the same. So by having a software, it does not change anything on the overall procedure. So it still goes with the claims, with the classification of the device, starting at the quality management system, defining about what you need to do, how your organization works, your technical documentation with GSPR, clinical evaluation, performance evaluation, and whatever, the combination with the risk management, usability, CE marking, and then also post-market surveillance. The general principle does not change. So the general principle is still everything the same, what we have with a software as a medical device and also AI in a medical device or AI as a medical device. But that brings additional points where we need to go more into a standard way and also more into a documentation way than we have on maybe other medical devices like physical, like a syringe. Why is that way? From the regulator's perspective, it's quite simple. From the regulator, you can just look into a physical device like a syringe, and you see everything. You can see and measure, you can verify, you can see drawings, leakage, materials. You can see it all. For a software, that's a bit more complex, because you can't see how the software really interacts and how it really works. You can see code, you can see workflows, you can see the flows in the code. However, what you cannot see is what is really happening. Well, at least nowadays you don't do that anymore. When you think about in the former programming with Fortran and assembler, there you can really see what happened. But we don't do that anymore. So with the currently developed software, you always work with objects, you always work with pointers, and with those you do not have this kind of depth knowledge about each register anymore, which is good, because the register numbers get huge, way more than it was in the 80s. And that's the point. So you cannot control this. However, what you can control is your procedure, how it will be built. And if you can control the procedure, how it will be built, then you can control the outcome. That is one of the main things for which was created by that. And also it comes with the point about a medical device software or the AI. And as we had medical device software, I don't know, since 2000-ish, and we've seen how that progresses, the AI is just the next step, where the visibility and traceability of results is even a bit less visible, a bit less traceable. However, it's a consecutive way from what we had in the past. So that means we need to control input to output, and we need to control how it is created instead of verifying what will be the real outcome, because it's statistically not that easily possible. That's why the same basic procedure still applies. Everything applies in the same format as it was. Risk management, usability, GSPR, clinical evaluation, you name it, all applies. However, it applies now in a different sector, in a different way, and with a specific angle. What I want to show today is also that particular angle is what you need to do to control your process, to control your pathway. We will get there within a few minutes into that details even more. So, but basically starting it with, like we did with the other presentation as well, with the medical device claims. That is something which does not change at all. So you still have your claims, your intended use, so intended use statement, which is rather relevant, then with the intended patient population, indications, intended user, and the principles of operation. This is exactly the same format. So just to rephrase it or to recreate it again, it is the main and basic information you have for a medical device and what creates you a medical device or not. Thinking about particular now on things like ChatGPT, like the AI is there, ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever, OpenClaw, you can use whatever you want, DeepSeek, every AI works in that case in the same principle. It utilizes a lot of data to get an outcome. But does that always constitute a medical device? And there's the question now from the manufacturer. What kind of claim does it include? So if the claim is clearly, hey, I want my AI, I want my software as a medical device for a disease, for a certain indications to be used, and that has something to do with a prognosis, prediction, or diagnosis, or treatment decisions, treatments, manipulation, treatment management of a certain disease bound to an indication, then this is a medical device. So the first thing, what is really, really relevant and really needed, then it is the indications for use you need to consider. The indications for use is the most important thing to decide medical device or not a medical device. And that goes then directly into the point that you can create the claims out of it, and with that you go from the medical device towards the claims, from the indications to the claims. That is the important step you need to look for and you need to decide. So, looking into that in our large language models generally, that's why Copilot and ChatGPT are not a medical device. It is not built for a certain indication. It is not built for a certain medical claim. It is built for general purpose. And that's why they always say, we are not a medical device. All that rules do not apply for us. All that rules are individually, and it is not relevant that we consider the medical device laws, MDR, and software as a medical device rules into that particular range. That is something which is now completely out of the scope. That's one of your first things you need to decide. Do you go for an indication? Do you go with a medical device claim? If not, the regulations are simply not applicable. Easy for you. If yes, then you are in the medical device area, and then all the other things like the patient population, the user, and the principles of operations will come into account. So that is also then the next step. The principles of operations, they are from the particular setup not very, very easily for the medical devices, and especially they are not easily to be described for an AI, because the AI has a very rarely clearly describable principle of operation. So what you can put in is the input and the output and how it will be weighted and how it will be calculated. However, you cannot see the real outcome of a particular operation, and as you cannot trace it in the overall long run, you are not able to create that kind of principles of operation documentation. In that case, we need to use a little trick and describe the interface, describe how it gets to the data and what kind of data is used in which weighting. So that is then sufficiently. looking into software as a medical device which is not AI-based, but with a general algorithm, you can simply place that algorithm as your principles of operation. So it shows you exactly the flow, what it does. Since, unfortunately, the principles of operation are part of the intended purpose of the product and therefore part of the instructions for use, you need to disclose to your user. You want to have that as vague as possible because of other competitive products. You want to have it only in a way that you can utilize it, but no one else. So in that case, please be very, very precise and very, very careful about what you write as principles of operations, and just put it in a way that it will not be used against you to save your intellectual property. So in that cases, be very, very careful. All other things, intended use, patient population, intended user, applies in the same form once you decide that your indications and your claims will be a medical device. In that case, once that is applied, your product will qualify as a medical device and the other things will also be included. So that's quite simple. So that's quite straightforward. So once you have that, you have your indications and you have your claim, you just perform the same route as you would do for a medical device, and that starts with classification. Fun thing, if you have a software as a medical device or an AI, or an AI as a medical device, or a medical device including an AI, you will most likely always have the same rule. It's Rule 11 for the medical device regulation for software products. That's actually that one particular rule which gives all the information. So, one thing you need to discover as well. You might have a product, a physical active medical device, like a patient monitor, which includes a software, like a firmware. So then is the question, is that extending the product, so is the software extending the patient monitor more than it would be in its natural use as a patient monitor? If that's the case, the software needs to be utilized or needs to be classified according to Rule 11. If the patient monitor just includes a software which is used to fulfill that purpose and the purpose of the monitoring and the surveillance of a certain patient, and that's it, then this software included, so firmware can also not be only be a firmware, it can also be installed software on a patient monitor, like a Unix system, including all the UI. You can use Qt or whatever kind of technology you use. All that is possible. But then you still need to decide, are you a sole or are you a software which extends the product, then Rule 11, or are you in that case, in the former cases, just a patient monitor which is used for diagnosis and monitoring of patients, as it should be, then Rule 10 is the applicable one for you. So that is the discussion and the definition you need to take on, you need to do and see what kind of range is relevant for you, what kind of data you need to look for in your extent of the product. Is your product big enough, or is the product extending just the physical product? Then the software product will remain classified on its own. If Rule 11 is applicable, if the software is just part of the product and does not extend its functionality, then Rule 10 is applied and it is a physical product. Or Rule 9 could also be a one for if it's a therapeutic device, like a cardioverter or a defibrillator or whatever kind of therapeutic device can be used for. So that is something which is relevant for you. Products which are external to that. So if you have a multi-platform usage for a different set of patient monitors, or if you have a control platform for dialysis machines, or you have a control platform for infusion pumps, that would be a software defined on its own rights. It would be an own product because the infusion system, the dialysis machine, or also as a patient monitor work on their own. They are independent. And if they're independent and you add another layer because of communication, collaboration to make it better and make it more usable, then it will be an addition to that product, and that addition will then lead to lead to another product, and that product will then fall under the Rule 11. So that's very important. Same happens if you build a hospital system or a hospital information system which includes and calculates on patient data. So generally, the hospital information systems are not a medical device. If they perform patient management, like locating patients, if they use software for managing the bill system, inventory, all that stuff, then not a medical device. Once it is used for patient-specific data to calculate for the benefit of that patient, then it becomes a medical device, because then it does diagnosis, therapeutic decisions, or it does other other pathways or other informations like the or other informations like therapeutic decisions or patient management or predictions. In that cases, that will work as well. So products for animal monitoring are not medical devices. They are part of the veterinary law, and therefore they have a particular other way. In that case, there's a specific law for that, and that's funnily not on a European level yet. That's by country-specific levels. Therefore, that kind of rule set is agnostic from all the medical device laws, which is good. And only things for humans are within the software as a medical device, IVDR, MDR, and AI for that. However, that's the point. You can utilize, or you have to utilize, if you use AI, the AI Act of the European Union. That will be because that is a horizontal regulation and is applicable for everything. So to the question about if it is a good practice or if there is a possible practice to use a device for animal trials, first for animal monitoring, and then to earn money with that in the beginning, and then go to the market with a medical device later on for humans with the same scope and the same focus, that's actually a doable practice. And that's a valid practice you can really use. So you build your product first in a certain part, say that it works on animals. Then you go with veterinary law, bring it into the market. In most of the cases, it's just as general software standards, general software product safety required, because veterinary law does not take care about software as a particular product section. Therefore, you're out of the original regulations. You only have a very low regulation to fulfill, and you bring it to the market quite fast, quite easy, works straightforward. And once your product has sufficient revenue created for making it to a medical device, then you can recreate the same product for the humans, then for a medical device, and in that cases, this will then lead to a medical device, according in that case, then Rule 11, 10, 9, whatever, based on your specific product type. So yes, it is a possible product, a possible pathway to go to animal usage first, and then go to humans once the data is fully available. However, please always look for that the product used on animals, the data created on animal trials or on animals, is not suitable for clinical data for humans. That's something you need to look for. All other things for the animal monitoring, that's totally different, so there's no big rule set, and that could be done quite fast and quite easy. All right, so after the classification, and as said, that's a bit of a difference with a particular software, with the software than with a physical medical device, we run into the required standards. I have here the 5 main standards. 5 main standards: ISO 14971, EN 62304, EN 62366, EN 82304, and the 18969 with particular clinical evaluation part. So all of these standards are process standards. As long as you do not have, and that these are all the standards applicable for most devices on an application basis. So if it's just a software, just an app, for instance, if it's just an app, then these are all the standards which are applicable for you. There can be particular product standards which you can use and get more information from, like if you use, for instance, an app which is created to face screen, and from the face screening it can create the blood pressure or like the insulin values. If that's the case, then you use the additional information from the blood pressure monitoring or insulin recognition devices. So all that parts you can use. However, since they are not particularly written for software, those specific product standards will be only partly applicable and not in full applicable. The 5 on that screen are fully applicable to your device and need to be fully considered. I will get more into the details of them, but those are the ones which are having the most content, and as said, they are process related. So we talk about the risk management process, the usability engineering process, the clinical evaluation process, the health software, and the software lifecycle, which deals in the direction of that. Okay. That's a pretty interesting question. What if an AI software is offering curiosity insights, no claims, no prediction, but is marketed to doctors and clinics for them to offer to patients if they feel that it might be appropriate to help for patient compliance, educating the patients? Does it make it a medical device? Can you give a 1-2 lines more about what is curiosity insights, and for a little bit of a more circumstances, because the part with just educating the patient, education can be achieved by Google as well, so that's not a medical device. But the curiosity insight, what does it do? Does it calculate something? Does it give additional values to a patient? To the doctor, where it can be relevant? Does it create scores about the patient's behavior or the patient's body physique, fitness, clinical status? If that's the case, then this is part of the decision support systems. Then it will be a medical device. If it just gives cohort information, so not patient-specific triggered information, but it is cohort information about certain age group, certain type of patient, those are particularly present with a higher score or with a higher risk and a higher calculation, and then you give that to the patient that, hey, you're now between 40 and 50, that means you should be in your BMA stage at that rate, and you should make the following things, watch out about your particular lifestyle in this and this and this area. Then this would be constituted not as a medical device. However, if you say to them, okay, this is now your state, you are compared to your age group, 40 to 50 years old persons, you are compared in the set following criteria, that's not yet a medical device. But if you now say you are in that category, however, and also that category has the following risk of a disease XYZ, then it creates a prediction score, and then it makes it a medical device, not taking into account the education of the patient. So all of them can have the same outcome with, okay, patient XYZ, use that, do more sports, eat that, sleep more, yada, 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 all that. That will not create a medical device. Only if the prediction part, the curiosity insight, if it triggers for a certain patient risk and a certain disease, then this will be on the medical device. I hope that clarifies the question. Else, please give a bit more information, then I can go more into the detail of that. Wonderful. Good. So. done, and then because then I have the QA section open, so I can live go into the questions in an easier and faster way. So, but going back to the required standards. The first one I want to explain was 4971, so risk management. That's the most used standard in all medical devices, because that one is used for any medical device. So it is not software specific, which makes it a bit weak for direct use. However, it makes it very general, which is good, because the more general it is, the more explanations you can have and can utilize. And that helps you quite a lot to get more details. Then the software lifecycle, that's applicable, so 62304, that's applicable for all products, including a software or which are a software. So this one is can be used for a firmware in a device, like any kind of device. It can be an insulin pump. It can be some easy traction devices. It can be a medical fitness system. Every firmware is falling for medical devices is in that in that standard. In addition, also all software as a medical device, an application, a web application, a native app, iPhone, Android, you name it, they are also falling under the 62304 standard. So there is now one very interesting catch. If your device or the software is part of an electrical medical device, and that device touches the patient, then an additional group of standards will be also applied, and these are the, I hope I can write that correctly, no, that was too fast. And these standards, which could be also applicable, are the electrical safety standards. It's the 60601-1. So if your device is electrophysical or it's electrical and you include a software, that standard will refer to your software lifecycle, and in addition it will refer to a lot of particular product standards. I will just refer to them as the product standards. They're also part of the 60601-1 row, and that one will give the additions about validation of your product, electrical, combined with the software. Can be including AI or not, it doesn't matter. So, but that one covers, so this one covers the validation of it. So, why is that important? If your software is a standalone product, so standalone software, not electrophysical, then validation is not covered in here because it does not include validation. However, the validation is then covered here in the 82304. That is your add-on if you have a standalone software, not electrophysical, and if you have a electrophysical, 60601-1 is applied. So either one of those two standards needs to be applied to fulfill all your information and all your package about the device validation. That's important because we have seen in the past many companies use the 62304, never considered 82304, built their app, built everything fine, and then they found out that the important step, validation to the user, was missing. When we talk about the validation to the user, we also need to look into the 62366, the usability. That is also a standard which relates, which is not directly connected. That's what the arrows are. So the directly written painted arrows are direct relations to the standard, how they interact based on the normative, and the others were how they work now intellectually. So 82304 points to the does not point in content to 62366. However, it utilizes the documentation there. So the formative and the summative evaluation of the product. We have that in the last presentation 10 days ago, so you can look for formative and summative evaluations there, and builds that for a software product. So, in the software product, standalone software, 62304 covered needs the validation of 82304, which needs the usability lifecycle process, lifecycle engineering from the 62366. If your device is not a standalone software, but is a medical electrical system, then you have the 62304, you have the validation in the 60601-1, and that one goes straight into another one, and that is the 60601-1-6, which is the usability and human factors for electrical devices, and that one refers then back to this standard, to the 62366. So that's the problem with all that kind of connected standards. So you have the ones which are software as a medical device, which are process related, and then you have the other ones, the 60601-1 series and all which is behind there, and that one is outcome related or technical related. That's because it is for a physical device, it is better to be controllable, it is more easy to be controlled than utilizing it on a more vague basis. The software as a medical device standalone, including AI, is more vague, and in that cases it is easier to control it by a process than controlling it on an overall system. So 4971, applicable for everything. It relates to all of them. So it doesn't matter which one, it all relates to the same. And also the one for clinical evaluations, 18969, this one is in particular also standalone. It shows whatever is needed for a clinical evaluation, and that was a huge journey. So that standard is quite new, so it's not yet a harmonized standard. Harmonization was described also in the last presentation. It is not a harmonized standard, however, it is now state of the art to be used. And it gives very clear and good advices what you should do to document a clinical evaluation with a clinical evaluation plan, clinical evaluation report, and gives you a good bunch of advice how to utilize it. In the past, so since prior to middle of 2025, we did not have that standard, so we have that information just for a very short time, and we utilized the standard, or not the standard, we utilized the legal text in the past instead of that standard. So it worked well, it worked good, however, now it gets more and a better clear pathway what we should do and how we should aim it. So it is a huge leap for the medical device industry to make the documentation better in the clinical evaluation and give better guidance and better hints what they should do. We didn't have that in the past, so we managed it as well. That standard is not yet mandatory because it's not harmonized, however it's state of the art and therefore you should use it. I really recommend to use it, and it includes also some short introductions about AI in clinical practices and how to do a clinical evaluation on AI, because it all matters with the particular outcome parameters. These are the most important steps there, and therefore we need to include those. So I didn't say a lot about the 4971 yet, so this one is applicable as said for all medical devices, doesn't matter which one, and it has one additional thing which could be very nice to watch for or look at. However, that's not mandatory. So ISO 14971 harmonized standard, it's one of the main standards, is applicable for all medical devices. And there is another one, that's a so-called TR, it's a technical report, TR 24971, so nearly similar number, and that one explains how to utilize 4971. So either you use that standard, you can get a lot of information how you can use it based on the standards committee's suggestions and ideas, or way more easy, you disregard the 24971 and you use YouTube to get tutorials about how to write a risk analysis, how to write the risk management plan, and the documentations. Honestly, the YouTube thing gets more depth because it has more practical examples. The standard is good if you want to increase your process depths, you want to increase additional input stimuli you did not have yet, and it's very good to as a very thorough reads through how to apply 4971 and about thinking about the concepts behind it. If you do not care about the concepts and you care about your outcomes, what you need to do, utilize the Google tutorials. There are loads of them in a very good way, how to do risk management for medical devices. They help a lot in the pathway. For me personally, but that's a bit biased since I do that type a part of a job since quite a very long time. I think the 4971 is very, very easily to be read and very good described. Same like 62304 and the other ones in here. They are very, very easily and straightforward and explain you what kind of outcomes you need, how you organize that outcomes, and how you do that in a particular row, order, in a format that it can be utilized in the overall system. The 60601-1 row is a bit more complex and it's very technically described. So for standalone software as a medical device, software is AI, so they're not applicable, luckily. However, they are on a few cases very helpful to get the best possible step. So, it's required standard. Conformity assessment. So conformity assessment and how it will be done and based on the classification is exactly the same as we have for the medical device general. We have, however, for our software, I recommend two different standpoints. One, you only have a class 1 medical device, which is possible, which is doable, and gives you a lot of possible options. So right now, the European Union just put out a proposal, so European Council gave out a new proposal how to rephrase a few things of EU MDR and IVDR, and one of the things is, for instance, Rule 11 for medical software. So there is a bit of a changes because when we think back into the past, prior to Rule 11, there was no rule about software, so software was just part of the other devices or not. And let me quickly go back because that's something I want to explain a bit more on that side. So prior to MDR, when we had the MDD from 1993 up to 2017, there was no Rule 11. So software was not covered directly or as an own. However, software was implicitly covered by Rule 9, Rule 10, the Rule 12 in here, which was former Rule 11, and the Rule 13, which was former Rule 12. So in that case, you either had therapeutic devices, which actively deliver energy to the human body. Then you have diagnostic devices, which actively acquire something from the human body. Then you have controlling devices or administering devices or removal devices, which take something from the human body. Yeah, you all think I know where I want to go. All of them are connected to the human body. But software is not. Standalone software is virtual. It's not connected to a human. In that cases, all of those rules did not apply. So only Rule 13 applied, and Rule 13 is in that case it was former, it was Rule 12. That is the general rule about if you do not have another specific rule for your product, then the product is class 1 and this rule applies. That was the former point. So former, if your software was not directly connected to another electrical medical device, which is therapeutic or diagnostic or removes and administers a medicinal product, then always was class 1. If you are in that relation, you get into a higher classification, like diagnosis software for CT, MR, or controlling software for dialysis machines, which go into a higher class. However, all others, which are just the apps, for instance, on the device, on a smartphone, all of them have been class 1 devices, which was very good from the market access standpoint. However, it was quite hard for the for patient safety. Now, 2014, 2017, when MDR and IVDR has been created, and when it has been rewritten, they introduced the rule 11 for software. And that is a rule only written for medical device software, either in a device or as a device. And that rule deals with the following things. So if your device is actively therapeutic or diagnostic and the outcome would be patient relevant or life supporting or life relevant, or generally if it could kill a person, it will be a class 3 medical device. If the device is very critical, however, the outcome, the timeliness or the direct usage will not kill a patient, however it can severely damage them, class 2B. If the device is a medical device and does diagnostic or therapeutic and therapeutic decisions and does not kill the patient or not severely damage it, then it will be a class 2A product. And all others will be class 1. So prediction, prognosis, all of those which are not directly in relation with the illness, those can be a class 1 devices. Especially if it's not talking about the patient, about the physician, but more on the patient side, then it will be a class 1 medical device. That is the current rule set. So, that was not enough. Then they created, in the so-called borderline manual for medical devices, that's a European Commission document, in that they created a specific row for medical calculators. Medical calculators used in hospital settings, which calculate a certain score for a patient, for a healthcare professional. Then those will be at least class 2A products, could be also class 2B or class 3, but at least class 2A. Okay, that would make sense for products like, if I say about the Jadwa score for heart insufficiency and cardiological problems, then it might be definitely useful. For products like the BMI or body surface and body mass indexes, all those, yeah, that's an easy calculator. That's just a one single formulation. Does not make sense to have it in a high-risk product. However, the borderline manuals mandates it. Long story short, they changed, or they are attempting now to change the rule to start always with class 1, that your device is always a class 1 product unless does not kill a patient, it is not in a severe situation, or it is not in all other medical situations, which then would lead to class 3, class 2B, or class 2A. It is right now a proposal, it's not yet done, so history will tell if the decision will be good and what will be the real outcome of that particular rule change. However, we have seen that will be applied in the next near future to get a better and a more detailed view about software classifications compared to what we currently have. So, what I wanted to go with is we are right now in a change of the rule. Hopefully, that will end, I suppose, the release of that, since the proposal was created in December 2025. So it will be discussed now for the next half a year, and then maybe end of 2026, applicable in 2027, that will apply. And that will then be the next step, what we need to go with our product forward. So, however, I go straight to the next one where I wanted to go for, because you still need to consider the classification for the individual conformity assessment. As already said in the previous webinar, quality management system is minimum Article 10.9, and also the technical documentation according to Annex 2 and Annex 3 is exactly the same for all kind of medical devices. Only a few certain things like post-market surveillance, the depth of clinical data, and the details of the regulatory documentation may change. All of the other things are really similar. That's why I came with the standards first. The standards do not do not have any discretion between if it's a class 1 medical device, a class 2A, a class 2B, or a class 3 medical device. They always have the same structured setup and the same outcome, and they mandate the same documentation. There will be one additional setup where, and I will explain that later, where we have there a different solution or a different outcome about the software risks. However, based on the overall setup, it will always be the same part. So either we go with Annex 4 for all Class 1 products, where you as a manufacturer can set the CE mark on your own, as it's a very low risk product. Same with input was the same. Then on the other side, you have for all other products, Class 2A, Class 2B, and Class 3. I recommend always to go Annex 9. In the other presentations, we had two additional pathways with the Annex 10 and Annex 10 and Annex 11. But I would not recommend that for a medical device software because of the changes. So therefore, always go to the complete QMS, go with certification with 13485, and then you go into the conformity assessment procedure according to Annex 9 if your device is Class 2A, Class 2B, or Class 3. If your device is a Class 1, then you go and then you don't need the 13485, and you go into the Annex 4. However, always the basic information will remain the same, and also the technical documentation will be the same. That's the funny thing, also including the product standards what we have. Considering Annex 9 will need to notify parties, that will have a huge outcome. So, there's another question. If a generic imaging device without any diagnostic function is certified as Class 1, can doctors at the hospitals purchase it for applying it in various use cases, so also those usually requiring Class 2A class certification, as supplementary information which simply provides measurements on their own, or do we need a list of possible use cases in advance? Oh, that's a very good question. So, there are a few concepts in there, which is a very interesting question. So there are imaging devices which are Class 1. There is imaging software which is Class 1, and there is also physical imaging devices like ECG visualization, which is a Class 1 device. And then, yes, that can be purchased by the doctors, by the physicians in the hospitals. If it's not sometimes there are tender rules which do not allow that. But in general, yes, you can do that. So a Class 4 medical device is a medical device. And then the usage in various use cases. If that device, without any diagnostic functionality, is used in a diagnosis situation, and is intended to be in that situation, then it's the manufacturer's fault, and the manufacturer has needed to describe it that way. If the physician uses that device without talking to the manufacturer and giving then the manufacturer giving the manufacturer the information and still uses it, so they do it on their own risk without giving first information, then this device will be in the so-called off-label use. That's not the problem of the manufacturer. That's a problem of the physician. As a manufacturer, you need to watch out. If you are aware of such kind of a usage, then you need to tell the physician, hey guy, does not work that way. You need to align with the intended use as described. If the physician says, yes, I do that, and this is exactly what I'm doing, it's all fine, and it's under my own pathway, you can't do anything. And that's good that way. However, be very careful about your diagnostic functionality or non-diagnostic functionality in the imaging device. So, but if you use, for instance, an imaging device used as an adjacent visualization of a certain part in the imaging, and this device is not directly connected to the human body, so it can be done with a bit of a distance, so the electrical standard does not apply, and also if the device is from its format, from its how it was built, and it's really so generic that it will be a Class 1 product, then it would be a possible pathway. to go the way to say, yes, class 1, and then all other behind it is based if it's outside of the described intended use by the manufacturer, it's an off-label use, and the off-label use is the issue of the specific doctor. It's not to be claimed on the manufacturer that they use it. As a good manufacturer, I would recommend you to speak with your physicians in advance and look with them about their particular use cases. And if they have a use case which does not work for your devices, consider that you need to classify it as a class 2A or a class 2B product, or that you avoid that and say, hey, within that particular indications, so-called contraindications, it's not allowed to be used. That's something you need to consider in your overall setup. So, going back into the conformity assessment, you have two pathways for medical device software. Either you go Annex 4 for Class 1 devices, or you go Annex 9 for 2A, 2B, and Class 3 devices. You can use the other annexes for the certification, but I don't recommend that for you. I really don't recommend, because on the long run there will be a lot of burden, and that's the better one. So let's go back on that. So, answering directly the next question. If a non-medical software is used in a clinical workflow for patient data segmentation or modeling, can its safety and regulatory compliance be adequately validated for medical use? There are a few things. So, if the software is non-medical, then the software is initially non-medical. So you can't have it you cannot have it quite good in both ways to say, no, that's not medical, however, you want to have it in a medical way. You can use the software in a clinical workflow if it is, as you say, patient data segmentation or modeling, so it is not for viewing regularly patient data, then yes. If it is not used for a certain patient, or if it's not used for taking informations or creating additional informations for a diagnosis or a therapeutic decision, then yes, it can be done with a non-medical software. Then software will work for a workflow like organization of the patient, organization of patient data, and organization of the workflow internally into the clinic. Yes, that is doable, and that can be done in a non-medical device way. That means that there's only the product standard, only product safety regulations and basic regulations on cyber resilience, and that information needs to be taken into account. All other things for the medical device cannot be or does not be taken into account at that point. However, that means that you cannot use the data created with that product for a later claim in a medical device. So you cannot use the product outcomes to say, hey, we have good results and let's do a medical device out of that, and we utilize that as a trial period. That does not work. So you can either have it as a non-medical device, or you go the medical device way, and then it most likely might have the need for the clinical investigation or clinical trial. But as we went also into 10 years ago, there is for such tools, if it just does segmentation and modeling of a certain data already acquired from a patient, and does that for transforming into another specification in a electronic health records, for instance. In that cases, this product can be validated by the user in their normal workflow, yes, on one side, so usability validation, 62366, and in addition, in the clinical evaluation, you go with the bench testing, because that will give you clear technical outcome data, like from the needed standpoint, and then you go in that cases with the Article 61.10. So in that cases, you can do that, and then you can validate your product in that pathway in a very good and straightforward format. it is not really done in the law, and it's also not intended by the law to have the data packages mixed left and right between individual setups from a clinical and a non-clinical setup. Hope that answers that question. All right, so let's dive now into the software standard. The software development process is a very nice procedure. It's a 62304 and 82304, and they have they have a lot of funny things. First of all, no matter what you hear online, no matter what you hear from very old persons, it does not care about how you develop your product. You can do it in the waterfall way, you can use the V model, you can use it in Agile, Kanban, Scrum, whatever. It does not care. The standard does not care how you develop software. The standard cares about the tasks and the outcomes. And therefore, it expects that the documentation is based on the V model. The final documentation. So the documentation when you want to release the product, that needs to be documented according to the V model with user requirement, product requirement, implementation, so architecture, implementation and coding, unit verification to the code, integration verification to the architecture, and also the verification, the system verification against product requirements. And then, since the standard does not have anything against user requirements, then the 82304 comes with the validation of the user requirements, or the 62366 comes with the validation to the user requirements. So that is relation to the end of the individual or the end of the standard, and therefore of the release of the product, and therefore that's the documentation needed there. On the way towards it, so creating the first requirements, creating the first informations, looking into the architecture, and letting the product grow during the time, in that moment, the standards is very open. It does not give you a limitation about you are only allowed to do V model or waterfall or agile. It gives you all kind of possible interactions. And that's the good thing what has been done in the past, and that's very good also in the first communications with in the standards, to see how they interact with each other. And as you have seen, the net into all the standards, how they refer to each other, that's can be quite complex, the more standards you use. Therefore, we need to align all of them. And that's the good thing. It does not care about how you create it. So, currently, the current development, especially talking about AI in the development, you will always have some kind of an agile system. So you will create first requirements. Maybe you have a set of user requirements and use cases already available. Then you will create a set of requirements. With that set of requirements, you will go into the architecture. You will create the code. You will create the product. You will look into the verification and see, yes, that's good. And then you add additional requirements. Whilst on the other side, you will do the validation of the product with key opinion leaders or with specific other persons. And that is what will happen item by item every day until you have the product you want to have, because you do not want to skip that pathway of the fast feedback, and therefore that's the best possible way. So that's the best possible way to create the product. However, then you need to watch out how to document the product, and that's two different things sometimes. So when we speak about the standards tell you a life cycle model, how to document a product, not how to develop the product. And that's a discretion you need to do by your own. And looking into it, how you want to do that, you can see it as it is all possible. So, the first thing is the software development process gives you no limitations. You can do it in the way you want. However, and that is one of the points when we spoke first about the medical device classification, there's a risk-based classification. There is now another classification within the software, within the software development. So, I told you that the technical documentation for all medical devices is the same. That's true on the MDR level. So the MDR has Annex 2 and Annex 3, which always is the same. So now we get into DEFs. DEFs is, for instance, 62304, 82304, and that one has particular other concerns and thinks about, hey, if you have a low-risk product and no risks, no harms, no hazards, then you should do less. If you have a higher-risk product, you need to do more to get more control. That's why it is a process standard. It's a standard which gives you the opportunities to go the full way during the complete run and gives you all the information how to manage your development and ensuring you have the best possible reasoning between efficiency and safety. And the more you need, Class C for software safety classification, the more you need to document. So they created a certain additional layer of decision directly in the beginning, and that means each software system, which is normally a complete software, has to be assigned a software safety classification. That is depending on the harm it can be for a patient, and it takes into account that this safety classification can be different from the medical device classification. So you can have a Class 3 medical device, physical device, which includes a Class A software. That means the software does not lead to a problem. It can be a Class 1 software, which could have a Class B software. So a Class 1 medical device, Class B software. A Class 1 medical device with a Class C software I have never seen in my life. I doubt that will work. So in that case, I do not think that's a good relation. However, from the other side, it's all possible. It depends on the extent the software does and how the software interacts with the product or is the product. So looking into that quite straight and plain, I start with the Class C. If the software has a hazardous situation which leads to an unacceptable risk and resulting in serious injury or death of the patient, users or third parties, that's a Class C product, high risk. If the product can have a hazardous situation leading to an unacceptable risk again, but not resulting in serious risk to the patient, other third party, and or if it has a control measure outside of the particular software, like the human, then it will be a Class B software. If there is no risk, no hazardous situation which leads to an unacceptable risk, and all the risk control measures can be done outside the software, then it will be a Class A software. So, what is important now? Important is talking about the unacceptable risk. You will do a risk management, according to 4971, and that has two layers and two areas. One is risks resulting in benefit-risk ratio in unacceptable, and one in a non-acceptable section. If you have a risk in the non-acceptable sections, and the software is creating or is part of that risk, then Class B or Class C applies. If you do not see a software risk for the physical product or a software as no product, which will lead to an unacceptable risk after mitigations, then it will be a Class A software. In the past, prior to 2015, the rule was a bit different. There was the rule just, okay, if there could be a harm in the software which can kill a person, Class C. If it can harm a person but not kill a person, Class B. If it does not harm a person, Class A. So since 2015 there came the additional layer about the unacceptable risk and acceptable risk into it, which makes it a bit more easy and shifts a lot products into the Class A, especially firmware products. So those will be taken into Class A in a way higher amount than it was in the past few years, prior to 2015. Now, with the new set, which is in most cases has been applied in 2020, so only 6 years ago. Wow, that remembers me since I have lived with all that during my normal work, since I do that kind of work quite a long time right now. So in the previous world, it was very high Class B and Class C level. Now it tends more into the Class A or then into a Class C, because then the peaks in the middle are not set very often anymore. So, why is that important? When you look into the software standard, software 62304, it gives for each clause of the standard, it tells you, is that clause applicable for Class A, Class B, or Class C? Or if it's applicable for Class A, Class B, for Class B and Class C, or is it applicable for Class C only? That gives you this kind of information, and that lowers the amount of effort you need to document. Sometimes it is still a very good idea to document things, even if you're not legally mandated to do that. However, sometimes it's quite good to have additional setups, additional knowledge into a particular product's documentation for the future, especially if you expect your team to grow quite fast in that moment or in that pathway. I would really recommend to document a bit more than required by law, because that will help you to maintain it correctly in the future and give you good information if your team changes and your team gets bigger and more persons are involved. Yeah. So, let's narrow it down. On a Class A software, what you always need to do is you need to create a software development plan, a software requirement specification, an architecture, software verification, as well as a software maintenance plan. These are quite simple and quite easy things you need to consider. So Class A software has the minimum information. A software development plan you always need to do. There you write down the information about what the software can do, will do. You will write the informations about the team setup, what kind of qualifications you need, how the qualifications are maintained, what kind of basic knowledge you will need, what is your external factors, your external documentation, your software is the unknown provenance, we'll explain that also later, and how you ensure that you have a control over it, so-called design control sections. That's a software development plan. You also include there things like how you release your product, how you can do that technically as well as virtually, and also how you deploy it. Is it an app store? Is it information for is it just some companies still do DVDs and CDs to deploy products, and all that kind of stuff, how it will be created. So that is the first level, and also then on that point there comes the what is not very oftenly used. That is, for instance, the metrics, code metrics, and all that additional criteria. So metrics, additional verification criteria, as well as the targets for that, is actually just mandatory for Class C software. However, I always recommend everyone to create a few little code metrics you can use quite simply. For instance, lines of code per function, total number of functions, functions per file, cyclomatic complexity according to McCabe, all these kind of simple and easy metrics which can be calculated very fast with a lot of tools. You can utilize tools like Doxygen. You can utilize any kind of easy setup and tool set. So it is a very straight and quite simple way forward how to help yourself, and the outcome will be in a later stage that this particular metrics will help you to maintain your code on a long-term basis. So the less complex it is, and so cyclomatic complexity, and the less hard it is to read, lines of code per function, lines of code per file, will help you to maintain it later on in a long term of product usage. And that should be always your goal, so look at that quite carefully. Then the next step is the software requirements. So the standard gives a hint about you shall have functional requirements, quality requirements, non-functional requirements, performance requirements, and always if needed. So you don't always have to do that. And if your product is quite small, quite simple, you don't have necessarily timings, architectures, and certain frames you need to consider, then in these cases you do not need to take care about all the kind of requirement sections. The functional requirements you always need to have, because this is what your product shall do. So these are your basic steps. And the others can be done then in additionally quality requirements, for instance, normally don't use, except I have a certain quality framework to be given, like a sensitivity or specificity of a certain recognition, then yes. So, next thing, software architecture. Software architecture was previously not part of Class A software, but Class B software. However, without an architecture, your product will be set up to fail. It's quite simple. Not on the short term, but on the long term. If you don't know how it is used, how it will be embedded, how it will be interfaced, it will not work out quite well. It will create a lot of friction in the future times, especially since normally most products utilize a server or an abstract situation, and therefore you have constraints from outside which are relevant for your product, which need to be covered in your product. Also, I will talk later on software of unknown provenance, how to handle that as well. So, the architecture, the software architecture is a very important step. If you do not want to draw architecture in advance, you do the following. You are creating your code, and then you use a tool like Doxygen, like Enterprise Architect or whatever, and recreate the architecture based on the tool. That can be done quite simple, quite straightforward, quite easy, and you do not need to dig into many things and many informations beforehand. And what I suggest is that you do it on a frequent basis. If you don't want to write the architecture, then utilize it, recreate it. For me personally, the tool I use best is Enterprise Architect, because there's some more depth knowledge about how to create a UML diagram out of code. However, also the free tools like Doxygen are quite easy. For instance, if you need a free tool for code metrics, it would be Source Monitor. Very old one, but still very reliable and very, very easy. However, with GitLab and others, there are loads of such tools available. So, since you have requirements, you will need to have software verification. And as said, you always have the unit verification, if needed, for Class C software. Then you have the integration verification, and you have the verification, the system verification. For the software requirements itself, there is a software system verification is therefore the relevant one. So you verify in a software verification that these particular points are included. So all requirements need to be covered by the verification, and all requirements need to be covered in an N2M target. So you can have one test which fulfills multiple requirements, or you can have one test you can have multiple tests which fulfill one requirement. So it's not only one-to-one, and that's not needed, but you can do that in a different way. Always remember that your requirements need to be traceable there. So software requirement traceability is there one of the main steps to be used in addition. So verification and software requirements will lead to each other's traceability. And the same with, as you see in the last bullet, between software requirements and the user requirements, there also needs to be the end-to-end traceability available. So you can trace that as well. Since validation is a different topic, it will come from a side stream. However, you have this particular traceability available. Software maintenance plan is the most boring document I ever seen. It just tells you what is a bug, how a bug will be fixed, how the software updates will be done, and what will be the next steps. So this one is very, very boring. So So it is quite, just fill it. Use it, fill it, and that's it. So no pixing. So I spoke a lot about software of unknown provenance, existing services. That's something which is very, very useful, since many products relate on either the user operating system, or they are built on a server, or they are built on an application which utilizes the phone. You do not need to take care about all the codes by your own. You can use external services. You can use servers like Nginx, Apache. You can use apps, libraries, or Unix libraries, glibc, or whatever is needed. You can use all of them. However, you need to know them. That means these are part of your architecture, and you will have certain requirements for them to ensure that this is what you really wanted. So from the standpoint of the regulation, you need to know which kind of soups you are using. Soup, or in US it's more called off-the-shelf, OTS, which can be commercial or non-commercial. So it doesn't make their difference. So it's off-the-shelf, it's someone else created. In Europe, we talk more about software of unknown provenance. So we don't know where it is from or how it was developed, because we don't know the process. And therefore, that's something outside of our control, but that's okay. We can utilize them. So thinking about this particular soup, any soup you use, it has its interfaces where you send data, and it has interfaces where you get data from. So that's a basic usage. However, you need to control that particular interface, so that you only give the right data and you always receive the right data in the right format. So this is things you can do and you can ensure. And then you set up the requirements, what you need for this particular service. Do you need a timing requirement, performance requirement? Do you need functional requirements, what it shall do? So you can give them in a very small pathway, and in a very small pathway and a very small documentation what is for this particular soup needed and why you use it. Always make a decision why you use this particular one compared to other possibilities. Sometimes you don't have possibilities, then you still describe, that is the one I use. We check the market, we don't find additional things. And what is very important for each of those services, you need to look for issues in the post-market surveillance system. So looking into the future after release and as part of the software maintenance, you need to control, as for each medical device, you need to control the framework, how it is being created and built. And therefore, this part of products, these are part of the product in that cases, then they need to be controlled by you by monitoring external databases like ZVS, like the scoring from the individual manufacturers, what they have as problems, and what they point from and what they have on their own public available documentation about their issues, how they wrongly calculate, or if they calculate correctly under circumstances, do they need particular updates to solve a certain bug you will have, or a cybersecurity issue. So, yes, and there's a question about the software documents related to the AI Act and Cyber Resilience Act. In this case, this kind of documents only relate partly to the AI Act and the Cyber Resilience Act, not at all, because the Cyber Resilience Act is just here in the existing in the soup list, quite interesting. So it does not care about the software development procedures, it does not care about the requirements there. So the Cyber Resilience Act is not, it's a different level and it's a different layer, has nothing to do on that level. The AI Act on the other side can be part of it, part of the documentation, and the AI Act requests that you will have the documentation, like requirements, like the architecture, like the verification, what can be verifiable, that needs to be done. For the cyber resilience and for the certain parts with the cybersecurity aspects, that is also part of the verification and the validation procedure. So in that cases, you will have verification and validation to be covered there. However, not in a certain direct way that you will say, okay, this is particular for the Cyber Resilience Act. However, during the verification of the product, you will come to the point to say, okay, at least we have certain cybersecurity things, measures we need to do. The most commonly used, the penetration test, which will work on a few product setups, not on all of them. However, that is one of the things you need to cover and you need to do. But the medical device section is not directly from the standard in the relation with the Cyber Resilience Act and also not the AI Act. I will come in the later part onto the AI Act, still going there. However, this kind of information is now the basic one for the software as a medical device, and we get the last one later on as well. So. Okay. Good. Always, since you need to consider OTS or SOAP as a particular product with interfaces, you also need to watch out how to see it in the case of you are or they are a supplier to you. So that's something many companies do not do in the software development. So they document the SOOPs they use, they document it in the setup of the product, but they don't push it to organizational level. And that is also a very important move. So the SOOP software, the manufacturers or the original manufacturer of a certain SOOP software needs to be part of your supplier evaluations. We had that last week, 10 days ago, when we talk about the quality management system, it has supplier management included. So these are suppliers. They don't need necessarily to be managed like many other suppliers. However, you need to consider them as part of the supplier list in case something happens, in case you will get issues with them, and or in case they have mandatory or big issues with their product, and that will then lead to further additional points you need to document. So be very precise that each SOOP is not only in your risk analysis and in your documentation, it's also each manufacturer of SOOP will be also part of your supplier file, which sometimes is a bit weird because then you will have the Linux Foundation as a supplier. You don't have a person for, you don't have anyone to claim for. However, it's part of the list and it needs to be monitored as such. It will help you at least in the point once you are documenting your post-market surveillance, then you will come across those and see if it is performing up to the particular standard, and it's not then only from one side, from the product side, but it's also from the organizational side, and that helps you a lot to make it correct in the right product. So, software verification, I already said a few things. There are different levels which can be done in one go, but I don't recommend that. And a test always consists about the input. Why do you have the test? What is your particular acceptance criteria? Your result given, the actual result, and the assessment of the particular result, if that is in line with the acceptance criteria and it's needed. Always ensure it has verification, it has traceability between the test and the requirement as one of the needed mandatory steps. So this verification is valid for all setups. It does not change if it's for AI Act, where you have more validation, of course, but it's also verification needed, or for the medical device. So in that case, that's the basic foundation of the standard. There's a standard which is called 25010 software query, and software quality attributes, and this one helps you there. So if you want to know more about those particular details, how to test and verify software, in particular reasons for Cybersecurity. South Korea Medical Device Agency has a very nice list. I can give you access to that list as well in the translated version. What kind of methods are good to be used for the certain software risk, and so those are mandatory, and which is totally optional for a particular risk. So write me by a message afterwards, and I will provide you the link or the document for this particular list. It's very, very helpful and gives you a very good overview that this particular method to analyze and document a product part is useful for certain aspects of product safety and product security. For Class B software, since we had only in the past, we only had the Class B software, Class A software we had in the past. Now Class B software, it requests that we have not only the overarching architecture but also a more detailed one. So we want to see into software units until it cannot be more detailed than it was in the past. So it really goes on to each detail of your code, of your file, of your function. However, it can be still done with the same tool set, so there's no need for additional tools. You can reuse that from the past. You can use the oxygen to recreate the same framework, and then you can go. Based on that, since you do that additional documentation step on the input, on the architecture, you will also need to include that in the software unit verification, that you ensure each unit has been completely, or it has been at least covered in one of the verification steps at all. If your software code is quite small and you do not want to have a big setup for that, then you could also use a code review and claim 100% code analysis to ensure, and verification to ensure everything is done. But that is a discussion you need to do, how you do that the best in your framework, because things like GitLab or GitHub as well, they already have very good automation frameworks, so you can have a very easy run through. So I get a bit more details into the software release because that's quite interesting and gives you good information. At the end of your product, when you are done with it, when you want to release your certain product, we always recommend to go through a structured software release. Normally that's part of the software development plan for the initial one, and then it is part of the software maintenance plan. It gives you the information. Okay, do you have your documentation available for software release notes? Yes. Are you ensured that all units have been implemented? Yes, no, or is it still acceptable if not? Sometimes you need to skip a certain point because you have an anomaly or an open issue you do not want to have, especially if you do agile development. There you might have lots of those. Then you look into the release process, if that is all covered. Is your verification done, and is there evidence there available? So do you have a full closed documentation for it? Do you know if there are open anomalies and how they are documented? Are they evaluated if they are still open, and how do you archive and ensure that you have it done? And then you circle back to the software development plan and check, did you have made all activities between what you have foreseen, and if there is an open one, you can either accept it or you need to redo it. So these are very important steps in the release review, which is quite simple, quite straightforward. So there's no rocket science. However, you should aim for all the points to ensure you have a good, valid release. It is not that deep from what you need to look for. It just gives the information that you have performed all the necessary steps. And that's complicated one. Okay, the next section we need to go is the risk management. The risk management is a bit more general driven and consists only about a certain part and a certain section about you need to plan your analysis, your risk management, then you need to analyze your product and the outcome of the products. You need to ensure that that will be requirements, what you need to do, verify, and then document the outcome. And on that way, you go through all of the individual sections about how you can continue with your risk analysis. Are you ensuring that you have your mitigations done? The mitigations can either be on a technical basis, they can be done on an organizational basis, or they can be also by information of the user, because that's also a valid method of risk reduction, even if it's statistically very bad to be proven. However, that's a very long journey. And then at the end, verification and validation of it, and with the product, with the final product, you put out the risk management report. So in the planning, you describe about the product, the intended purpose of the product, you describe the criteria, how you want to measure risks, how do you want to analyze them, and what is your basic calculation criteria when you say the risk-benefit calculation is not positively, or the risk-benefit calculation is not sufficiently covered, or you need to redo additional steps because you do not have mitigations successfully or sufficiently in your setup. That, as said, will lead then to design documentation. Design documentation will circle back to your software or your product requirements. So with that point, and as you can see then, the risk management will be part of your design input and will be part of your product documentation on the risk level, and gives you then the next possible information. That will be transferred from the product requirement into product requirements. That will be transferred into the product architecture, into verification, and that verification will then be referenced here in the risk management. So it's an additional task about analyzing the particular outcomes. However, it is on the document side, it's quite simple. You have the risk management plan, you have the analysis, and the risk management report. These are the three documents you need to create. That's it. That's from the document side, it sets it. In this case, for risk management, since a standard is very, very generic, it can consider all kind of particular risks, like miscalculation, wrong data sources, and that means it also includes the AI Act in that particular framework. So whenever the AI Act talks about the risk analysis, risk mitigations, you can use 4971 in addition. So there is a very wonderful checklist available about the risks for AI-based products. There's from the industry standards, industry group or interest group, notified bodies, cybersecurity and AI. They created a wonderful list about all points and checkpoints you can do in the risk management documentation to ensure that your product is safe and everything is good based on AI covered products. Please ask me later on also about that particular link. I can provide that as well, and it's quite straightforward and quite useful. At the end, risk management report, as it's part of the technical documentation, you point out and decide that this particular product is most likely safe. It has a few open things which are disclosed in the user manual, which are not fixable because that's a user's part, or that's a part where you cannot do a lot or where you don't have much information on, and that's then something you need to cover in a particular additional way. So the risk management report closes all the activities like you do with the software release review. The risk management report closes between the plan, the analysis, ensures verification is done, and all the risks can be considered correctly, justified, or assessed as not too harmful compared to your intended standard of care and to the current real-world data. Which means the risk management report has a lot of reliance to the clinical evaluation and the user acceptance of the product. Therefore, that interacts now together with the usability and the clinical evaluation. And that is in particular with the clinical evaluation report, the use specification, and the summative evaluation. Since the summative evaluation gives you the information about the issues you have with the product or the potential likelihood of issues, it deals with information you will do in the risk mitigation section about how often an issue based on usability will appear. That comes back to the use specification, because that will tell you if the product is used according to its specification or if it's used in a different pathway, different format, like we had when I answered the question about the off-label use. That is something which goes into that direction. So, and then it comes with a top layer about the medical need, and that's a clinical evaluation report. And the clinical evaluation report gives then the particular additional information about this product is useful for the first certain indications with regards of the contraindications, its intended use, the state of the art, and all that stuff. But that's the same what we had in the last webinar. Now, for software and for AI products, the clinical evaluation adds a bit of things like, as it says, needs to be considered in state-of-the-art things like the upcoming product versions or variants or the change of the products in the future. So it needs to be more forward-driven than what we had on physical products that is completely historically driven. So there is a bit of a different addition for particular software products, but 99% the same. It goes on performance and safety of the device as it is. And for the physical, and now with the software products and AI products, it also need to look a bit about what is acceptable to be changed and what kind of performances are acceptable in the future, especially for AI products, so we can see how they interact, how they are correctly set up. So, there are a few things we need to watch out, because the interrelation between AI Act and MDR is not, or IVDR, is not very well established. So that's something we really need to look for how it will pan out in the future, because in the moment it is not in a way that we have a good setup and a good view and a good relation to it. So since all Z regulations are completely independently developed and the Act and the regulation are not particularly in line with each other, it leads to a lot of friction in between. But that's something which will be overcome in the next few years. And luckily, based on the implementation of the national committees, there are a few countries which are a bit advanced, where you can already try and use the AI and utilize it for market access. On others, it will still remain and still take some additional time to be consumed and to be created in a correct setup. So, in addition, and that's quite good for those with who have not yet a national agency available, for those, the future application of the digital omnibus will also be a very good pathway, because that one will give clear advice in the certification and conformity assessment with multiple regulations. That's something we need to watch out. So, but let's go into that. There are a few things and the most interesting facts we need to consider. On one side, as we have a medical device classification, and right now you also know there's a software safety classification, the system in the AI Act is different in that particular view. So many AI products become high risk because it's a medical device or a safety critical component. So that's something, regardless if it's a Class 1 medical device and therefore low risk, or a high-risk medical device. That's something which needs to be considered. In addition, also one of the most interesting things is that integrated compliance is allowed. So you can have it in one technical file and one conformity assessment based on the digital omnibus. However, that means there are additional steps and things you need to consider. Quality management and the risk management systems need to expand to include the AI-specific elements, which is very important, and also the post-market surveillance, since AI has a lot of changes in the system, as it is especially for the adaptive systems, very important. That means we also need to consider those. I want to go into those in more detail. So where is the additions, the difference? Not talking about all in the AI Act, because that will fulfill years of additional informations and days and training days. Therefore, I want to harvest only the most important steps and the most important ones. So looking into those particular things, looking into the dual risk classification, also in the other items to go there. I also want to put out a few things which might be confusing or might be leading to additional issues which are relevant for you as manufacturers. That's something we can show here right now. For the general purpose of the AI Act, there's a lot of additional information already available. All right, so the conformity assessment. There are a few possible things what can be done. There can be direct CE, so the general CE mark in references both relations is on self-certification only possible if you have a class 1 medical device and a low-risk AI system, which is very, very rarely coverable. So that's something which can be which can be done. However, that means that the software or the AI does not fulfill an AI critical component, and also it is as particular that the software has only a very low risk product, and therefore it is in the overall setup class 1 plus low risk. Then we can go self-certification CE. In most cases, both regulation or one of the regulations will have a notified body and the other one not. So class 1 medical device and a high risk AI system, then that sole number of the notified body who has the conformity assessment for the AI, for instance, that topic will be then applied. Otherwise, if there are both regulations and both are covered by different notified bodies, you would have technically 2 CE marks on the product. So, and there it's when it becomes a hassle. Since the current regulations does not allow that kind of duplicated of a CE, because MDR is not considered that way, therefore you need to be very precise that your notified body you use for a medical device also is able to do the AI Act. Else you will run into the duplicated CE, which will not be possible, because with that one you are not able to get a free sale certificate, because it's currently just not doable. It's technically not doable to get a free sale certificate for your product with 2 different CE marks, and it's also not possible to register the product with 2 different CE marks. Therefore, it is very important for you as a manufacturer to watch out if your notified body will be able to utilize both regulations, so AI plus MDR or AI plus IVDR in the combination. Finally, all other regulations like EMC, machinery, labeling regulation, and whatever is needed, so EMC, product safety, consumer grade products, machinery, low voltage, all of them allow the AI to override their own CE mark and utilize that. Unfortunately, not IVDR and MDR. These don't allow that. They are currently potential pathways to allow this kind of possibility in both pathways, so that there is one particular additional CE mark or CE mark by one notified body overriding the other one, but that's in the system not really possible. And right now, the MDR and IVDR do not accept this. So both regulations would need to have 2 additional conformity assessment procedures, and that will then follow up and lead to certain friction in your certification as well as your product registration. So looking long term, choose a notified body who can do both. That's an important step you should go for, and you should really need to look into the future. So very important to have that, especially since the digital omnibus for the future does not consider that in addition. Not yet. There will be a mechanism called out, but it's not yet available, so be very precise what you want to do with the next few years. Since AI regulation is not a single one, it is covered by a lot of additional regulations from the or touched by another one. That's very important to include those as well. So Cyber Resilience Act, AI Act, MDR, EU Data Act can utilize AI, GDPR, DSA, and the DMA. Those are the ones which are also covering parts of the AI system. And as you go there and have it a bit more into a few more details to show about that, with the combination between AI, since GDPR, DSA, DMA, Data Act, and the Cyber Resilience Act do not talk about MDR in particular, which is good, I have only included the impact together with the AI Act because that is additions. So, like in the GDPR, the AI Act gives on additional rules about the fundamental rights of each human being, which are not yet covered in the GDPR, and it does not replace GDPR, but enhance it. So it's a rule add-on. Same happens with the DSA, the Digital Service Act, because the functionality is in addition. So the Digital Service Act, together with the MDR, are unfortunately mutually exclusive. So you can either have the Digital Service Act or the MDR, but not both of them together, even if AI Act would combine both of the regulations. With DMA, Data Act, and Cyber Resilience Act, there is the same status. There is additional complement informations, complement practices you need to include or you need to ensure during that. So that's one of the big problems, since the AI Act has been built up very horizontal compared to the verticals we had in the past. The verticals would be easier to control and easier to watch out and look for, whilst the AI topic with the AI Act on the horizontal basis will have a lot of additional setups and requirements and parts needed. The good thing is, when you look into software as a medical device or AI in a medical device or AI as a medical device, the MDR is the main regulation which drives nearly every of the documentations, and the AI Act is an add-on. So it's good for our area, because the MDR is very well described and has its kind of an age right now where it is usable in the market, and AI gets the addition. As there is a very nice checklist already available who deals with all the points of the AI Act, and when you think about what I had in the last presentation and this one, 90% of the tasks you need to do are already covered in the quality management system of the medical device, so the AI Act relation is not that much to be done in that particular space. However, it is done in a lot of spaces in addition with other regulations from the AI Act's perspective. Luckily, not for us, but for others who don't have a medical device, it is more intense. So the idea behind this, you can look for and you can decide now, do you want to have the focus on the AI or on the medical device? From the medical device standpoint, I would say, hey, go for the medical device. That's more relevant. That's better. However, if you can say your device is not an MDR product, like the one we had in the examples during the day, where we have a non-medical device which can be used within the pathway, or we have a non-medical, or we have an animal product. If those continue or include the AI, in that cases, the AI Act will be the main driver. That will then lead to additional efforts on the side you haven't had in the past. With MDR, it's quite straightforward and it's a quite simple path. So, that's on that part, the short description on it, that how we can regulate it, how we can organize it, and that's a very important step. We need to go with the components of the AI, safety components of the medical devices, which can be done in the AI Act. And the very important step is the ones on the lower bottom. So those are the ones relevant, that the MDR leads for device safety and efficacy, whilst the AI Act focus on trustworthy, which means more visualization or more transparency towards the user. The medical device and the MDR does not like the traceability or the transparency towards the users that much. However, we need to comply with both, and therefore we have the possibility to only show and be transparent on the AI stuff and do not consider all the other parts. That's part of this system, like the medical device is a product, and the AI regulates, the AI Act regulates the technology. System as a technology within a product, which is good for the segregation, and to say that AI Act is only applicable for XYZ in the product, whilst the rest of the product, the medical device, is not covered by that at all, and therefore has the total overview about it. So looking into that, for if you go from the MDR standpoint and you have a medical device, you have the documentation, you build the documentation according Annex 2 and Annex 3 of the MDR with the relevant standards as shown, focus on safety, performance and clinical evaluation, efficacy first, and then add the fundamental rights, transparency, accountability into the products, add it into the risk management to include and extend the risk management setup and the systematics behind the MDR product to ensure you have those covered as well. And then you go with from that with the obligations into the quality management system. Luckily, the AI Act is very nicely describing what kind of obligations you need to cover in and you need to include into your quality management system to get the full package. However, or to get all the obligations done and covered. However, it is on the MDR way a bit more cluttered into different sections. So the advice is clearly start with MDR documentation first and then go AI Act documentation, unless your product sales strategy gives you that in a different, complete opposite direction. Always consider one is a product and one is system or technology consideration, and therefore it has two different pathways and two different trajectories within the overall system. So, going back from the standard, what is actually in AI, and that is one of the main things in the AI Act, because it's just talking about a machine-based system operated with varying levels of autonomy and that may exhibit adaptiveness after deployment. So, actually, so you can log in an algorithm, then it could still be with some. It has no, because it only has may exhibit adaptiveness, so the AI can or cannot change after deployment. That is, one very weak point, because it gives a lot of information. But the big thing is varying levels of autonomy, which shall deal with an AI system. Unfortunately, no level of autonomy is also a level of autonomy. Therefore, that's something which also can be considered. Luckily, there's already a blue guide out of it, which describes that particular matter in more details to show what are the individual things. To have the discretion between the AI system and the non-AI system, we look into the following parameter in medical devices. If we can go with pre-calculated values stochastically through each of the particular lines, and we know how it works inside out, so we can follow each variable, how it will be calculated in the next step, and the next step, and the next step. Then in that case, it has no autonomy, because we know from start to outcome exactly what pathway it will run through the algorithm. That's classical algorithm. Previously, prior to all that large language models and all that steps, there was also the kind of stuff where we had the where we had the information for the for products, for for product deployments, and also from the levels of autonomy in the model-based systems, in the model-based setups, and therefore we had in the past also this kind of autonomy levels based on model-based development. However, that come on later on into an algorithm that was the outcome, and that outcome with MATLAB or whatever then deployed a full product, and that full product gives the individual setup and gives the individual outcome. So it was a very important and straight pathway to talk now about levels of autonomy, and talk also about if the autonomy can be verified, then it has no autonomy, no level of autonomy, or if it has a certain unpredictable pathway within the coding, then it will be a level of internal autonomy, and therefore it may be an AI based on the AI Act. Sounds wonderfully complicated. Luckily, it is quite straightforward. Can it be done stochastically? Yes. Then it has no autonomy. Can it be done in a pattern and not stochastically? Then it has no autonomy. If it is just a stochastically outcome on a particular pattern with a confidence result, then in that case it has autonomy, and in that case AI Act can be applied if it's model-based. That's a simple calculation on it, but that is just the beginning of the AI, and it comes later on in more details or it comes later in a few years with more details and more additional results. So that going into the classification, which is one of the main things that talks about minimal risk, limited risk, high risk, and unacceptable risk. Unacceptable risks are products which are totally banned from the market, where the European Union says no, that's not allowed. High risk products are products with a certain on a certain annex, on a certain table, and those are the ones which can be part of medical devices. They can be safety critical devices. There can be a lot of additional products which can be there. Limited risk and minimal risk are particular AI systems which have been proven or which can be shown in a certain level, certain transparency, certain knowledge, and are not part of that annex lists in the AI Act, and those are then in the particular risk levels of limited and minimal risk and do not fulfill a safety critical functionality. So most medical devices will be in the high risk section. Some of them will be in the limited risk section, but that's very rarely in that. So we have this particular calculation to be covered. Okay, so as said in the previous thing, that the correlation between the medical device classification and the AI classification is not directly, so it can be done in different setups, and it can be medical device low risk, whilst we have AI Act high risk. That can lead to conflicts in your declaration. However, it will be very precise in your regulations, and that's what you need to cover. You need to look for the regulation first to cover them in the correct way. Okay, so one last point about the products. No, two last points. One of them is the prohibited products. So there are fundamental things which are not incorporatable with the EU rules, like social scorings or manipulation or biometric behavior, which can lead to clusters, cluttering, or specific specific person recognition in a certain level, which shall not be done. Then the limited risk, it skips the high risk for later on for the medical devices. Then the limited risk products which have the transparency obligations, which are in possibly like in chatbots, or sometimes also deep fake situations. Deep fake situations only if they do not be in the prohibited practices. So there are circumstances in which the deep fakes are allowed. And then we have the last ones, the minimal risk products, which is hopefully the majority, where it just has no real obligations and only a few certain things to be considered, like the voluntary code of conduct. Most medical devices will be in the high-risk AI systems, so they will have a significant impact on the health of the patient, because that is what the AI shall do in that circumstances. It shall help to get into the right knowledge, that it shall cluster a lot of data. It takes the large language models to create the right setup and create the right diagnosis of therapeutic decisions. That's what the AI shall do. It shall not be just a chatbot to communicate with elderly patients to make them feel better. It shall give them more knowledge what they need to and that is then as a relevant decision you need to do with the high-risk product. So most likely high-risk product if you use AI for medical. All right, so one particular thing, the last thing I want to explain is the obligations. Since the prohibited ones are absolutely banned, so that is a very clear, straightforward way, so there's nothing to be done. It's quite clear. You are not allowed to do it. That's it. Minimal risk has no binding obligations, but it is encouraged to follow the voluntary code of conduct to get forward with the device. Limited risk has at least the transparency requirements to show this product can be used with AI, it uses AI, and shows in that circumstances AI has the following prediction, calculation, and knowledge it gives you. And then we have the last one, which is the high-risk product, which has very strict requirements. So risk management, as already explained. The data quality need to be very covered, and that is validation of the medical device. So if you have the medical device, you can have the data quality compared directly with the validation of the device. Technical documentation extends a bit compared to the medical device, what we already had, and it still contains a conformity assessment as described. Human oversight and transparency requirements need to be managed and need to be created and shown. However, the oversight can be, and that's a good thing on medical devices, the human oversight can be totally covered in the post-market surveillance system we already have for medical devices at all. So most of the things you need to consider during the AI Act setup will be also included in the MDR by direct, normal conformity and direct impact of the law directly. So the update into AI is not that much, and especially talking about what will happen in the next time with the digital omnibus, all that will then give the clear answer about how you build the conformity assessment into one package, and based on that, what we currently know about that, the European Union wants to go straight forward into the AI topic with combination with all possible regulations and encourage the European companies to build more AI systems and skipping the information, so skipping duplicated procedures and turn it into one, but always think about that damn it, I forgot what I wanted to say. Human oversight, conformity assessment, transparency. But always think about that the conformity assessment only can be done by one notified body in the current setup. Okay, so there is a question. According to these regulations, where would pre-trained machine learning models fall into, considering that their predictions would be deterministic and the level of autonomy would be minimal? Okay, if it's a medical device, and the prediction would be deterministic, however, it has a level of a minimal autonomy, so it has an autonomy, so it can decide which kind of variant it uses to calculate the prediction. In that case, it would be, because it's a medical device, a healthcare device, you could, if the AI is just used, so if it is pre-trained and the prediction will be deterministic and the level of autonomy, that's a pretty. Give me 1 second, because it's a pretty good question. Because it's with pre-trained and it has a prediction, deterministic predictions. Then you have a deterministic confidence interval. If you have a deterministic confidence, it actually has no autonomy. It can just decide which kind of calculation it uses. If that's the case, if it's just deciding about which calculation will be used and can transparently build that, in that case, I would say it would be a limited risk product. In the case that the autonomy is still in the code, so the prediction is not really deterministic, it's partly deterministic, in that cases, I would consider it as a high-risk product because it is part of the annex list. That answers the question, hopefully. Yes, please follow up with the next one on that. Because from my side, what I wanted to explain today with the Interrelation AI Act to MDR in the software as a medical device, in combination with what we had already last week, I'm done with the content to be delivered, so I'm very open for any kind of questions right now. What I can answer, and yeah. So if you have additional questions, I would be very happy to be there. Because from content-wise, I am at the end of my presentation and would be happy to questions.